Hey, HorseCenter fans, there's so much to talk about coming up this week, a lot of big races. But before that, we're going to start with everything that went down at Parx, Penn Derby, McKinzie, the questionable disqualification of Monomoy Girl in the Cotillion, and a savage running of the Gallant Bob. What else, Matt?
Yeah, Brian, it was a crazy weekend at Parx, but we've got a great weekend of Breeders' Cup prep races, winning your ins, Super Saturday at Belmont Park, Accelerate against West Coast at Santa Anita.
And mind your biscuits right here in Louisville. Watch it all now on HorseCenter. Welcome to another edition of HorseCenter, everyone. I am Brian Zipsy, and as always, I have the great pleasure of being joined by my co-host to the East Coast, that's Matt Schiffman. How are you today, Matt?
I'm very good, Brian. It was a exciting and crazy weekend of racing at Parx, and we got a big weekend coming up at Belmont and in California.
That's right. Big doings coming this weekend, Matt. We're going to get to that soon. But first, let's talk about everything that went down at Parx. As you said, it was a little wild, a little crazy. Let's start with the returners, because I think part of the big story of this big day at Parx was the returners from Bob Baffert. Two big names collected, who was second in last year's Breeders' Cup Classic, and McKinzie, who was one of the early favorites for the Kentucky Derby. Both made their returns on Saturday. Collected fizzled, but McKinzie did not.
No, that is absolutely true. Collected fizzled, and McKinzie sizzled. There was really very little doubt about the outcome of the Pennsylvania Derby. McKinzie got going and sat in a great position, and coming around the turn, he was a relatively easy winner against a pretty nice field that was assembled for the $1 million purse.
I got to say, though, Matt, I was disappointed with the race run by many of the Pennsylvania Derby horses. Your pick, Axelrod, was the only horse that really gave McKinzie any battle at all in the stretch, and it wasn't much of a battle. McKinzie was clearly best. Times were slow all day, this being no different, kind of a slow mile and eighth, but McKinzie ran a good race, tactical for Mike Smith, got in good position off a pretty moderate early pace, and like you say, he was best. He looked best most of the way. McKinzie came back in style. We thought he was one of the most talented 3-year-olds 6, 8, 9 months ago, a year ago almost, and it looks like that's still true. McKinzie, I guess the next question is he a viable threat in his next race, which is the Breeders' Cup Classic, 10 furlongs at Churchill Downs against Older? Seems like a big step up, man.
When you put it like that, it does seem like a big step up, Brian, but like we've been saying all year long, there hasn't been anybody that's been dominating the older male circuit, really, aside from Accelerate and Diversify. And there are still plenty of question marks about both of them in terms of running away from their home bases. So question marks abound, I think, for all the horses that are likely in the Classic at this point.
Yeah, having said that, though, Matt, older is older and younger is younger. I still think this is going to be a tough stretch for a horse like McKinzie. All that time off, he came back and ran the Penn Derby that he did. Kudos to him. It was a good effort, a good performance, a very good performance off such a long layoff, but I think it gets much tougher. Even the distance of 10 furlongs, I think, plays against him with his lack of seasoning and his lack of seasoning recently. So for me, I don't see McKinzie as one of my major players for the Breeders' Cup Classic.
I can't argue with the way you laid that out, Brian.
Yeah, and I don't even know if we'll see Collected or not. Baffert said he came out of the race good, but hard to know. His form before he went on the shelf was not great, and then of course this was a far cry from what you'd need to see to really expect much in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Hey, Matt Schiffman, my question now is to disqualify or not to disqualify. You make the call. Should Monomoy Girl have suffered only her second career defeat, only her first of a wonderful year she's putting together in this year's Cotillion.
Yeah, Brian, that was the big question this week about the disqualification in the Cotillion. It was Monomoy Girl, the favorite, riding her win streak of Grade 1 victories into the $1 million Cotillion, and it was Monomoy Girl who crossed the finish line in front. The inquiry sign did not go up very quickly, though, Brian. It didn't go up until Mike Smith was able to get back to the winner's circle area where he could lodge a jockey's objection in there. I guess at Parx, the outriders aren't carrying walkie-talkies to send the objection in. Stewart's inquiry did not go up, but after that objection went up, it was a long time as the stewards watched the view of the head-on over and over and over and over again. It played on the big screen and the television sets around Parx. Certainly in the pan shot, it didn't look like anything much was happening. In the head-on, there was no visible contact before them. There was some riding going on with Florent Giroux and Mike Smith. I think when Florent Giroux on Monomoy Girl put a little squeeze when Midnight Bassoux was on the rail, Smith shifted paths out to the outside, and that added to the movement of the horses outward, which caused the disqualification. Midnight Bassoux changed her momentum and was moving outside, and Florent Giroux went along with that. Did Monomoy Girl move some paths outward? Yeah, I think they did, but I'm not sure whether it had an effect on the outcome in the race. I give the Parx steward some credit for making the change and taking down Monomoy Girl. Some folks said if it was switched around and Mike Smith and Florent Giroux were on different horses, that the outcome may have been different. I don't know. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, I'll state my opinion a little more clearly. I kind of do think Monomoy Girl should have come down. Instant replay views, you look at what you can see, so it doesn't really matter to me whether it looked like she should come down on the pan or not. What we saw in this disqualification and this stretch run, of course, was the head-on, and we saw Monomoy Girl come in and give Midnight Bassoux a little trouble down towards the rail. And then as Midnight Bassoux went out, of course, Monomoy Girl herded her farther and farther out. Midnight Bassoux had a lot of horse, it looked like to me, Matt. Midnight Bassoux, I think Mike Smith had a lot of confidence that he was going to win the race by him doing what he did in the stretch and pulling her back out and going wide. And Monomoy Girl, while brave and while it was another good performance, I don't think this was her best performance. We never know for sure. Of course, I don't know. No one knows for sure if Midnight Bassoux ever gets by Monomoy Girl, if it's a clear stretch run. But we can't assume that Monomoy Girl is just tougher and braver and is going to hold her off late. I think there was enough there to make the change. I understand that's a little bit of an unpopular result and an unpopular point of view, but I think there was enough there to say, yeah, the winner of this race, whether it's a huge cotillion between arguably the best 2-year-old, 3-year-old, two 3-year-old fillies in the country, or whether it's a $10,000 claimer, I think there was enough there to say the one horse herded consistently and really cost the second place horse from getting there in the wire. So for that reason, I think it was a proper decision to take Monomoy Girl down in the cotillion. Again, these are top horses, especially the horse that got taken down. She's the 3-year-old filly champion. This is only a slight blemish on her resume. I do wonder if maybe after all the racing that she's starting to tail just a little bit. Still, I think it was a good performance, and I think she has a big shot in the Breeders' Cup Distaff. Midnight Bassoux, as kind of I talked about, I think 1 1/16 is a much better distance for 1 1/4, and she ran a really big race. Wonder Gadot, separation of powers, did not Maybe Wonder Gadot is one that's tailing off a little bit, but a very good race. And these two have had good races before. This one looked like Midnight Pursuit was primed to win it, and I think the lack of straightness down the stretch probably cost her the victory. Now, the only other thing I would say is, it's hard because we don't know what one track or one region is going to do versus the next with these disqualifications. It would be nice if it was certainly more uniform, and you can certainly see that some tracks are just a little bit more quick to DQ and others aren't. So it's not very uniform, making it tougher on the fans and the bettors especially, and definitely the owners and connections of these horses. But in the end, for me, it's whether the horse cost the other horse the position, and in this case, I think she did. One last race I want to talk about from this really nice card at Parx, Matt, of course, was the Gallant Bob. The Gallant Bob generally is a very good race for 3-year-old sprinters every fall before the Breeders' Cup Sprint, and this year was no exception. In fact, the horse that won the race, Matt, is quickly becoming one of my favorite horses in training. Frenzy Fire, I think this was his fifth nice stakes win now. He runs a lot of good races. We both thought it was a little ill-conceived to try the Derby. I can understand why they wanted to try the Kentucky Derby with him. But since the Kentucky Derby, he's come back great, running really big races, really big one-turn races, and another nice win for Renzi Fire. But, Matt, I don't think that was the biggest story coming out of this race.
Yeah, I just want to agree with you, Brian. Renzi Fire really has developed into a cool horse. He every time you think he's tailing off and it's time to count him out, he bounces right back and gets another big win. Here he is, winning at 6 furlongs at Parx on, like we said, on a racetrack that was slow. A big sprint like this goes in 1:11, so the track was really slow, but he ran great. He broke alertly, sat right there, went right by, got a challenge coming down the stretch, and for a minute there looked like he was going to get past until the challenger decided that maybe he'll change his tactics and turned his head and tried to bite Irad Ortiz, who was riding Renzi Fire.
Yeah, whether the horse was trying to bite Ortiz or the other horse, I'm not sure, but certainly it was a great case, a good example, at least, maybe not a great case, but a perfect example of savaging in a horse race. And this was a pretty high profile day and race to have it happen. But the horse coming off a win at Laurel was a long shot where she told me to go. I don't think that this horse was ever going to get by Renzi Fire. I think that was part of the problem, part of the reason for the Savage. First off, Matt, we don't see it a lot, but these are wild animals, and I know they tend to do a little nipping back in the backstretch. Here we saw it in late in the stretch. I don't think he was going to get by Renzi Fire. I think that's why he might have wanted to take a nibble. By the way, Matt, I've never said this to you before. We've been doing the show for 6-7 years, and we're in different locations. But there have been a few things that you've said during HorseCenter where I kind of would have, if you were closer, probably reached over and tried to take a bite out of you. It's never happened because of our locations, but I can understand why it happens in a race. I'm almost surprised we don't see it more often. But the winner, Renzi Fire, survived the rally on the outside. He survived the savaging. And now we wonder which Breeders' Cup race Renzi Fire this horse were. By the way, fans, to throw out that 1:11 and change, it was a slow track. This is a really good horse. And I'm interested to see which Breeders' Cup race he goes in, the one-turn dirt mile or the BC Sprint. What do you think, Matt?
Well, I talked to Jason Service after the race, and he's clearly going to enter both of them. And when the pre-entries come out, he's going to take a look and see which field he thinks is a better spot for Renzi Fire in there. Breeders' Cup victory would be great for those connections. And it was interesting, Brian, talking about you don't see it very often. Earlier in the card, I think it was the 5th race, a horse tried to savage twice another horse coming down the stretch at Parx. Maybe it's just being in Philadelphia. I don't know.
Yeah, the fans are tough there, and the horses are tough there, I guess, Matt. I didn't know about the 5th race. Very interesting. I'm gonna throw out my opinion as I always tend to do. I think Friendly Fire would be better suited for the dirt mile, going that one turn mile, and I think it probably would be a slightly easier field than this year's Breeders' Cup Sprint. Enough about biting on HorseCenter. Let's talk about the racing again, Matt. Jockey Club Gold Cup is this week. Do you remember, sir, what happened 1 year ago in this race?
I think I do, Brian. And of course, we're talking about Super Saturday at Belmont Park, where there are 3 win-and-you're-in races. And it was Diversify in 2017, winning the Jockey Club Gold Cup. And that New York bred is coming back this year, likely to be a big favorite in the race to try and win back-to-back Jockey Club Gold Cups, which has happened a bunch of times in the past. Horses winning back-to-back Jockey Club Gold Cups, but they have all been marvelous horses to achieve something like that.
Yeah, that reminds me of what Slew of Gold did a little over 30 years ago, Matt. Hey, Diversify was awesome in this race last year. I think this setup, this weird 1.25 mile configuration at Belmont Park, he's a horse that likes it. They start on the turn, of course, so it's not quite 2 turns at Belmont Park, and Diversify seems to eat it up. Having said that, he was awfully good at Saratoga, and just looks like he's getting better and better. The winner of 10 of 15 Lifetime, Diversify, is certainly one of the best older horses in the country, and certainly on this track as much as anything. But all of it, the 1.25 miles at Belmont Park, the fact that he likes this track, the fact that it's his home base, makes him a clear favorite, a clear horse to beat. But we need to talk about the speed a little bit, Matt, because there's 2 really talented horses coming over from Europe, and both of them have good early speed in Thunder Snow and Mendelssohn. I think of the 2, Mendelssohn might be the more likely to throw down with Diversify early.
Yeah, Brian, I agree. Both Mendelssohn and Thunder Snow are coming over. Interestingly, with both of them, their last wins for both of them were at Meydan in Dubai on World Cup Day, when Thunder ran off with the World Cup, and in the UAE Derby on the same day when Mendelssohn ran off with the UAE Derby. Their performances were very, very similar on those days. Visually impressive. I was wowed by both of them. But I'll be honest with you, Brian. I don't think either one of them have the kind of speed that Diversify has, when coupled with his ability to carry that speed over long distances like 1.1 miles and 1.25 miles, and you throw in there how much he loves Belmont Park. Diversify, 6 for 8 in his career. He's won his last 4 starts in a row at Belmont Park. I think one or both of them is going to run with Diversify, but I don't see them being able to stay with him the entire way around, which begs the question of who's going to be coming from off the pace.
Yeah, Matt, I think it does bother Diversify. I mean, when we handicap races, we look to see whether there is a horse out there alone on the lead. Will he have it easy? Will he be relaxed? Will he be comfortable without too much pressure? I think Diversify does have the most speed in here, although Mendelssohn can be very, very quick early, too. We saw that in the Dwyer. We saw that in the Travers. So, and I don't know that you take either one of those 2 out of their natural running style. So I think just that pressure of quality horses, whether they have the speed you're talking about to go 10 furlongs with Diversify is one thing, but whether they have the speed and the quality to bother him, to make him uncomfortable during the race, I think is another thing. And I think that's certainly a possibility. I will say that the Luch Racing has a long shot, as they often do in here, and he has a bunch of speed too. So there's speed in this race, and I think it does make it just a little bit harder on Diversify. So getting back to what you said, yeah, we do want to look to the ralliers a little bit. I think we both agree that Diversify is the one to beat, speed or no speed. But we do have to pay attention to the ralliers a little bit more in this race because of all the speed in this race. Obviously, the horse I think that's going to get bet the most of the ralliers is the horse that rallied from last to be second in the Belmont Stakes. I'm speaking of Gronkowski, a European import who's now been with Chad Brown since the summer or since late spring. There's a few others in there too. Discreet Lovers ranged up nicely in a few races. And Patch, popular Patch, the one-eyed horse, also has the ability to rally if this pace is hot. So it's an interesting race. Diversify deserves to be 4 to 5. Interesting to see how the Euros do as a prep for the Breeders' Cup Classic, but a very important prep for the Breeders' Cup Classic, but also a little bit interesting for me from a betting standpoint.
Yes, certainly, Brian, and a little, just picking up a little bit more on Gronkowski, preparing for the show and watching the replay of the Belmont Stakes and his runner-up finish to Justify. He made a very, very nice run and was not getting beaten badly by Justify, the Triple Crown winner in there. Clearly, Gronkowski liked the Belmont surface, liked the big sweeping turn at Belmont Park. Of course, Gronkowski threw in a clunker in the Travers, and Chad Brown says that it was due to the difference in racing surface. So if, in fact, Gronkowski can run his best race at Belmont Park, he could be a threat coming down the stretch.
Yeah, he certainly can. In fact, if he runs the Belmont and this pace does get heated, yeah, he's an obvious threat not only to be in the exacting trifecta, but possibly even win if they soften up Diversify enough. I think Mendelssohn will be a slight second choice ahead of Gronkowski because of what happened in the Travers. I think Thunder Snow probably would be the fourth choice. I tell you what, Matt, I didn't expect to say this, but I really think for me the bet in here is Patch. Patch is probably a notch below a lot of the favorites in here, but with the pace, I think Patch is a 1.25 mile horse. He's run well at Belmont Park. I like his races at Belmont Park. I actually thought in the Woodward he ran a good race because he had some traffic in there and was beaten less than 4 lengths and rallying. So 1.25 miles with speed, Patch at 20 to 1. I think he's a threat to have a good finish, whether that means third or second, or maybe even win. I don't know. It's hard to bet against Diversify, but Diversify's 4 to 5, Patch is 20 to 1. I'll put a little bit of money on Patch to pick up the pieces. Gronkowski, yeah, he's had one. He's a long shot in the Belmont. He ran big, didn't run it all in the Travers. I still want to see a little bit more. I think there's a good chance he runs a good race back at Belmont, but I don't know if he's worth the odds for me. So my play in the Jockey Club is Patch.
That's an interesting play, Brian. You're going to get a good price. I saw Patch as the likely fifth choice in the race, and if in fact he's another one that does his best running at Belmont Park, could be interesting because certainly I don't see all three of those horses, Diversify, Mendelssohn, and Thunder Snow, sticking around until the end. So at the very least, Patch sounds like a good play to get into the exacta or the trifecta.
Hey, Matt, the 3-year-old champion from 2017 is back, and he's running against Accelerate.
Certainly is. You're talking about West Coast, of course, out of the Bob Baffert barn. Can Baffert work his magic again, Brian? Can he get another one ready off of a long layoff? We'll see. Remember, West Coast, we haven't seen West Coast since he ran in the Dubai World Cup behind Thunder Snow, finishing second. And before that, he finished second in the Pegasus World Cup behind Gunrunner. And before that, he was third in the Breeders' Cup Classic. He danced all the biggest races, got some time off, and is now preparing for a matchup with Accelerator, who is at the head of the handicap division for males. Baffert said the other day that West Coast, he's got him about 80%. I don't know. Is that just Baffert saying that, or is he really just got him at 80%? because if he's just 80%, Accelerate's going to be tough to beat. He's got some resume, Brian, in 2018.
Well, you just heard me pick Patch in the Jockey Club Gold Cup, so let me jump out on another limb, Matt. I'm going to give you a cold exact in here. I'm going to say Accelerate on top of West Coast. Well, that's not saying much, is it, folks? Yeah, Accelerate has been the best horse, best older horse in the country pretty much all year long. He's run nothing but good races. Even his race to Oaklawn I like quite a bit. He's obviously in career best form coming off that big Pacific Classic win. I've said before, I don't love to bet horses coming off of just monster margin victories like Accelerate did in the Pacific Classic, but I just think this is a great spot for Accelerate. The rest of the field is not much to talk about, so it really comes down to Accelerate and West Coast and advantage Accelerate in this one. Having said that, West Coast has some serious advantages himself in that Baffert has been training him up. His workouts are good. And if you look at West Coast's form, Matt, he's never run a bad race. In fact, he's never been worse than second in any race in his career, save one. That was the Breeders' Cup Classic last year, where he ran a very good third. So West Coast is consistent as they come. You rattled off his last three races. Before that, he won 4 straight stakes in impressive fashion. So West Coast was a deserving 3-year-old champion, very good earlier this year. Collected did not come back well. McKinsey did. Baffert says that McKinsey seemed like more of the type to come back first race strong than maybe West Coast. So we'll see. I'm not putting too much into that 80%. I just think this is the race where Accelerate has the advantage over West Coast. But I'm really interested to see this race because I think both are big threats, especially with West Coast getting a prep moving forward to the Breeders' Cup Classic.
Yeah, I agree with what you said, Brian. This race is much more important looking ahead to the Classic and Accelerate continuing the great things that he's done and seeing at least some kind of good performance from West Coast in here.
Absolutely. Matt, in this era of Breeders' Cup, well, this era now that's been going on for over 3 decades, a lot of these big older races become more a prep for the Breeders' Cup than anything else. The Jockey Club Gold Cup, the Awesome again, they have their history, especially the Jockey Club Gold Cup. The Lukas Classic at Churchill Downs doesn't have that kind of history, but I think it's another race we need to talk about, especially when you consider the Breeders' Cup will be held at Churchill Downs this year. It's also Saturday. It's in my neck of the woods here in Louisville. And there's some interesting horses in the Lukas Classic, but of course the most interesting horse, another New York bred, and a terrific one at that, is Mind Your Biscuits. Is he 6 furlongs? Is he a mile? Is he a mile and a quarter horse for the Breeders' Cup, Matt? Hopefully we find out a little bit more Saturday in the Lukas Classic.
Yeah, Brian, certainly that's going to be the biggest question that I hope we will get much closer to finding an answer to in the Lukas Classic. Chad Summers has got Mind Your Biscuits down there already at Churchill Downs. He's been down there for a couple weeks. He plans on staying down there after the Lukas Classic for the Breeders' Cup, and hopefully we'll get an answer there for Mind Your Biscuits. Can he throw in another good two-turn race like he did in the Whitney when he was second behind Diversify? And if that doesn't work out, then I guess we'll cross the Classic off of his list and consider the Dirt Mile or the Sprint for Mind Your Biscuits. It's not an easy field. There are some good horses in there to challenge Mind Your Biscuits, like Honorable Duty, who loves Churchill Downs, has been second in the Stephen Foster the last 2 years behind very good horses. This year he was second to Pavel, and the year before that he was second to Gunrunner. And then there's the story of Toast of New York, who's also in the field. Toast of New York, if you remember, we got to go way back to 2014 when he was second in that controversial finish to Bayern. He came back with a race over in Europe and then got crushed in the Pegasus World Cup in January. So it'll be interesting to see if we get a little bit more of the old Toast of New York in the Lukas Classic.
Yeah, kudos to Toast of New York for still being able to run in races like this after so long off. However, for me, it's more of a novelty at this point as far as looking at this race from a handicapping perspective. Not, I think Toast of New York is, well, maybe he surprises me, but I can't expect him to really do much against these horses Saturday at Churchill. We'll see, though. Maybe he will surprise me, and it'll be a pleasant surprise if he does. You mentioned Honorable Duty. Frankly, I think Honorable Duty is one of the most underrated horses in America. You know, he missed some time the first half of this year, but if you go back to January of last year, both Fairgrounds and Churchill Downs, he's run a number of really good races. And he's second in the Stephen Foster 2 years in a row. Just a lot of good races, both at Fairgrounds and Churchill. Obviously, he likes Churchill, as you mentioned. Mile and Eighth is right up his alley. He was second to Pavel in the Foster in a race that probably he needed a little bit. So I expect Honorable Duty to be a real competitor. Mind Your Biscuits will have to prove that he can do it 2 turns on a fast track. It should be fast here for the Lukas Classic. So I'm not sold on Mind Your Biscuits going 2 turns on a fast track. The Whitney was a sloppy track. He ran a good race, but we'll see. He'll be heavily favored in here. From a betting standpoint, I am more interested in Honorable Duty, but I kind of want to see Mind Your Biscuits run big, just from a fan perspective, and really have the options open as far as the Breeders' Cup go for him. Super New York bred. One other horse I should mention here is a long shot possibility. Breaking Lucky, son of Looking at Lucky, has a lot of good races in his background. He's run it well at Churchill Downs as well. He's only had 1 race back this year, and it was a third in allowance race. But on the other hand, it was a very fast sprint at Saratoga. That should have him sharpened up for this race, and he could pop in there as well. But all eyes on Mind Your Biscuits Saturday at Churchill, Matt. Not all we've been talking about is dirt today. How about a little grass? Let's get on the green stuff. Let's take to the turf for the Turf Classic, the Joe Hirsch Turf Classic at Belmont Park. Another race with great history. And right now, Matt, if we decided on a turf champion, a male turf champion for 2018, it would have to be Robert Bruce. 8 of 9 lifetime. 6 of those wins came in Chile. He's 2 of 3 here with a win in the Fort Marcy and a most impressive win last time in the Arlington Million. He certainly is the favorite and the horse to beat, stretching out to 12 furlongs for the Turf Classic.
Yeah, Robert Bruce, the horse with 2 first names. Chad Brown barn, so you know if it's a turf star, very likely going to come from Chad Brown. Hasn't run any bad races. 1 loss. He had a troubled trip down the stretch and was had momentum going and had to stop. Could very well be unbeaten in his career. It's a good field in the Turf Classic, Brian, so it's not going to be easy for him. We've got Spring Quality coming back in there. We remember Spring Quality finished just behind Robert Bruce in the Fort Marcy and then came back and won the Manhattan on Belmont Stakes weekend at a big price. We've also got Carrick in there, who was a little bit of a surprise winner of the Secretariat on Arlington Million Day, beating the good colt Analyze It. That was against 3-year-olds. He's stepping up to face older in here, so that makes it a tough task for Carrick. Channel Maker is in there. Consistent runner for Bill Mott. Was in that dead heat with Glorious Empire, but I think it's Robert Bruce's race to win.
It is Robert Bruce's race to win, Matt. We still don't know just how good Robert Bruce is. Really impressive turn of foot late in the 1.25 mile Arlington Million. Obviously, he's a horse of ability and class, but on the other hand, as a heavy favorite, you know, it might be worth a shot. 12 furlongs at Belmont Park is a pretty different game than 10 furlongs at Arlington Park. So, yeah, he's the horse to beat. He's the horse that really could be the best turf horse in America out of this group. There's what I would call the usual suspects behind him in this race. So it's a good turf classic, but it's not a great turf classic. Spring Quality might be developing into a very nice turf horse. But on the other hand, he's had some chances this year too, other than winning in Manhattan. Channel Maker, High Happy, Sadler's Joy. I'm not big on the 3-year-old in this spot. Any of those could win the race and are solid 1.5 mile horses, and they seem to take turns, frankly, beating each other a little bit. But none of them are world beaters by any means. So if Robert Bruce is the real deal, he very well could win this. Having said that, like I said, the odds don't appeal to me, but the odds do appeal to me big time on a European shipper, Matt. I think this race is going to be won. Earlier, I talked about Patch as my play in the Jockey Club. He's kind of my play to get into the picture, get into the exotics. I'm probably not expecting a win for Patch in the Jockey Club Gold Cup. However, I am predicting a win, and I am kind of expecting a win for Teodoro. Coming from England, he's making his first start in America. If you look at the past performances, you can see why he's a long shot in here, because he's a little bit on and off again, and he hasn't really run in the best races over in Europe. But on the other hand, he's a hard hitter who's run in a lot of good races in Europe. And horses like that come over here and win. They do it all the time. He's getting Lasix, and I think most importantly, Matt, he loves to be on the lead. This is a race without a lot of speed. Channel Maker has a little bit of speed. High Happy has a little bit of speed, but there's no real speed in here. Teodoro is real speed. Give him Lasix. Give him 1.5 miles, a distance he's very well suited for, and give him the lead. Give him Ryan Moore up in the saddle. Give me 20-1, Matt. I think Teodoro is going to win and pull off a big upset in the Turf Classic.
I like your logic in there, Brian, especially when you talked about the rest of the field as the usual suspects. We know them, and we know them well, and we know what to expect from them. But this is the new one in there, and knock on wood here, Brian. I don't think we're supposed to get any more rain the rest of the week in the area, so that would make me think that the track might firm up a little bit and make things even more favorable for a speed horse.
Well, we'll see. Either way, I think Robert Bruce, like you said, is the horse to beat. The horse could be turf champion and might be really, really good. But on the other hand, I'm excited for the betting possibility. Teodoro in the Joe Hirsch Turf Classic. All right, folks, that was another edition of HorseCenter. We hoped you enjoyed it. Matt and I always talk about our other venture a little bit here at Derby Day Racing. Unfortunately, we had our first start last week, Matt, and it didn't work well. Our Looking at Lucky filly Sooner Schooner was bothered badly at the start, never did much after that in a turf debut at Churchill Downs. Also, it looks like we have an excuse in that race because it looks like she came out with a little bit of a wrenched ankle out of the race. She'll be off for a little bit, but we still have extremely high hopes. In fact, Buff Bradley told me he was surprised by the performance because he thinks she's a good filly. So we'll see more good things out of Sooner Schooner for Derby Day Racing in the future. Matt, we need to thank our sponsor, the best contest site out there, Derby Wars. And also, I want to urge you to subscribe to our YouTube channel right here at Horse Racing Nation if you haven't already done so. How about a parting shot or two from you, Mr. Schiffman?
Yeah, I agree. I'm still excited about Sooner Schooner. Give her a little time to rest up that ankle, and she'll be running down the stretch soon. As always, I want to thank our producer, Brett Workman, for putting together the show. And folks, stay with us as we are now well into the road to the Breeders' Cup.
Lots of Breeders' Cup coming right here on HorseCenter. We'll see you next week.